I'm not an extremist of slowness. I love speed, right? Faster is often better. We all know that, but not always. And that's really the key to unlocking this slow revolution. It's about doing things at the right speed. Musicians have a beautiful term for this. They talk about the tempo giusto, right? The correct tempo for each piece of music. And that kind of gets at what slow with a capital S is all about. It's about doing things. Sometimes you got to be fast, but sometimes you want to slow things down. And if you go a bit deeper with slow, it's actually a mindset. It's quality over quantity. It's being present and in the moment. It's doing one thing at a time. If you remember back in the days when we used to do that, ultimately, slow really is doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible, which is a very simple idea, but one with the power to supercharge every single thing you do from the boardroom to the bedroom. So that's what slow is. I think
That's
you
what's
had a
slow.
second part of the question,
Well,
which
well,
was
it,
why
it
am I
just
the.
yeah. We'll ask it in a moment. But I have this. I won't say argument. This conversation with my wife occasionally because she suggests that men can't multitask, and
Hmm.
my answer to her is, well, actually, nobody can multitask.
Yeah.
We can only do one thing at a time. And I suggest her, which doesn't go down well, but I suggest her that multitasking is can lead to stress, and we're designed to focus on one thing at a time. That seems to be a part of what you're saying, to do exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. To give each thing the time and attention it deserves is
Mm,
another way to think about slowing down, which runs deeply and powerfully against the dominant culture we live in
mm,
now, which is about doing more and more things faster and faster and layering multiple things onto the same moment. So
mm.
this is the world that puts multitasking on a pedestal. And your wife is not the only woman who goes around saying that. My wife has been heard to say the same thing, but it's not true. I mean, neuroscientists, both male and female, are of one mind on this, which is that human beings cannot multitask. We can't think meaningfully about two things at the same time. If when you're multitasking, in inverted commas, what you're actually doing is you're juggling. You're toggling back and forth between activities. So activity one gets, I don't know, 10 seconds your attention, then activity two will get five, activity three. And guess what? All of that gear grinding is just as cognitively wasteful as it sounds. So if you take two people, for instance, the fast multitasker who looks really dynamic, getting stuff done, juggling, looking really modern, and then the slow monotasker who, wherever possible, slows down, does one thing at a time. If you give those two people the same list of tasks, what happens? What happens is that the multitasker will take up to twice as long and will make up to twice as many mistakes.
Yeah.
So this is brings us to what I call the delicious paradox of slow. That the slow person, doing one thing at a time, looking maybe a little plodding compared to the fast, dynamic, juggler next door, is actually not slow at all. They're more accurate, they're more on point, they're more efficient, they get stuff done better and they get it done faster. So this
Mm.
is one of the beautiful things about talking about slow is that it immediately subverts the common misconception, which is that slow is boring, lazy, unproductive. You slow down your roadkill. If you slow down judiciously and wisely in the right way at the right moments, everything gets better. You're going to do it better. You're going to be concentrating more fully. You're going to be more creative. There's just so many things improve when you slow down. And one of the first steps doing that is to hang up your multitasking hat and go monotasking wherever possible.
We also now know now from with regards to neuroplasticity that if you're multitasking, which means you're jumping from one task to the next, and if you do that repeatedly over a period of time, which we're all guilty of, you are training your brain to operate that way, I imagine. So
Yep.
your brain is now more. I think what has happened to us as a population is that we now we are multitaskers, and that has become habitual. It has become comfortable for us. Doesn't mean it's pleasant, but it's where we go to. So I think we
Mhm.
have to. Sorry, when I say we, I have had to drag myself out of multitasking because my
Mhm.
mind goes to it, and you have to retrain your brain. So I think part of embracing the slow movement is the realization that we are going to have to retrain how our
Yes.
brains want us to behave.
And the good news is you said it there in words of pretty much one syllable. The brain is plastic.
Mm,
So we've reworked the brain and rewired it to be multitasking.
mm,
That means we can choose to unspool and rewire it back to
mm,
its original point, which was being able to concentrate on things. And it's so true what you're saying there, that the default setting for modern society and culture has become multitasking. It's got to the point where it's just eroding every single thing that we do. I mean, people, there's this whole phenomenon now, second screening, where people
mm.
can't even watch a Netflix show or something without looking at another screen at the same time. And now we've got the tail wagging the dog. So people are making TV shows and so on, knowing that the audience is multitasking, won't be able to concentrate. So what do? They dumb down. So we get worse art because people are playing this multitasking card. You see it in universities. You see it across the whole of society. People can't read books anymore. Students would rather read an excerpt or a paragraph or an AI summary than sit down because they find it almost physically impossible to delve deep into a book or an idea or play with a concept for a long time and think of all the nuance and the shades of meaning and the layers of understanding and creation that we lose when we just whittle everything down to a straight line, which is what you end up doing with multitasking because your brain cannot deal with that richness when it's doing more than one thing at the same time. But you're going to get one little channel of information coming in here, another channel there, and each channel will be very narrow and very thin. It'll be thin gruel. And is that really what living is all about? Is that good for the workplace? The answer is no on every front, right? There's so much to be gained when we move away from that multitasking model, slow down and start monotasking.
It makes me think of sometimes you watch a movie, a great movie, but you've read the book, and people go, "That was a great movie," and you go, "Yeah, but the book was phenomenal." But
Yeah, that's
I'm sure you've
right.
had that experience, and you go, you read, you. I'm going to say maybe the only exception is Lord of the Rings, but then
Yeah,
it took them 9 hours to make the movie.
that's a relief that it's
Yeah.
not. Yeah,
But by and large, you've spent whatever, hours and hours and hours reading a book, and you immerse yourself in the characters and all the situations. And now maybe they'll go, I don't know, 92 minutes, 2 hours or whatever, that they'll put into the movie. And it's enjoyable, but it's never quite good. And I think that's kind of what we're tasting in life. We're tasting the highlights of the movie, and
yeah,
we're not appreciating what it would really feel like if we opened the book and read it word for word.
yeah. I mean, that's a good metaphor. I think food is a good metaphor for this. The kind of the TV version or the movie version is like scoffing down a canapé.
Yeah,
In enjoying the book in all its fullness is like sitting down to a 5-hour banquet, right?
yeah,
And they're two different things. And sometimes all you want or need is a canapé.
yeah,
But if you live in a world that's all about canapés, that ultimately is pretty unsatisfying and
yeah.
superficial. And I guess what the slow movement is preaching is that we want to get back to a world that's much more of a smorgasbord. So there are moments when, sure, sometimes you just want a quick hit of something or you want a little dopamine squirt or a bit of fun or a bit of canapé. But other times you need to roll up your sleeves or just kick back and sink into a long, slow journey of either
Mm.
discovery or pleasure or both. And it's about finding that balance again. It's about finding the balance between fast and slow.
I think what I'm hearing is it's not good or bad. We need the ability to do both. And what I think you're drawing attention to the fact is that we're losing the ability to do both. We've dropped into a fast world, which, by the way, you need at times. You're trying to make a flight or something, but you need,
Yeah.
but, but the slow world is there. I've been in India a number of times, but I remember the last time I was there, and it could be 8 years ago or whatever, on a meditation retreat, but it was very, very hot over there. And they took us up this beautiful outdoor shaded area one day. And so we were staying in the shade, so it was a small-ish area. And they said, take off your shoes and walk. So we were staying in the shaded area. So just walk around. And the instruction was to bring all of your intention to the fact of walking. Bring every attention. And when your mind drifts, bring it back to walking. And so for me to be able to embrace this, I literally noticed my heel resting on the floor and the rest of my foot going down, my toes, and then the next foot. And we did this for maybe 20, 30 minutes. It was blissful. I mean, bizarre. So much so
Yeah.
now that if I feel myself rushing in something, I will sometimes just go, maybe it's just around the house, walk. And if you walk like that for 5 minutes, your whole nervous system just slows down. It's absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful.
I'm a huge advocate of walking. You probably won't be surprised to hear. I do think that walking is a supreme act of slow for a start, because it's very hard to walk at the wrong tempo, right? If you're walking too
Yes.
fast
Yeah.
or too slow, it's uncomfortable. Your body sends you. It's just wrong. If you are walking, you settle into your tempo giusto, right? You're the right tempo for you, and then you've got that thing of moving through the world. Especially, I'm talking about walking without sort of listening to music and podcasts and so on. And you can fire up your five senses. And there's something about, I mean, there's that Latin phrase, solvitur ambulando, the idea that things work out through walking, you solve things through walking. I mean, all the great thinkers in history have been great walkers, right? Whether in the arts, science, or business. Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher, once said that all great thoughts are conceived while walking. And I always feel like walking is the ultimate and maybe the original act of slow. And the way you've described it there is almost supercharging the slowness of walking, right? Is bringing that extra level of intention to it, to shutting out the sound and fury of the modern world and disappearing fully into the act of walking. The way walking connects the mind and the body with the spirit, with the moment, with the senses. There's a kind of glorious cornucopia of experience that's unleashed when you walk properly. I'm not talking about speed walking or power walking or the kind of walking people do in London
Yeah.
here when they're trying to get to the tube on time. That's a very different thing.
But
And I'm also
purposeful walking.
purposeful walking. And
Yeah.
in a way, I think we've ruined walking as we've ruined so many things with our obsession with speed and optimization. I see people talking about walking all the time now. It's often appended to discussions about how many steps they got on their counter, right? So suddenly
Your
everything's got
watch
a
is
metric
telling you.
hanging
Yeah.
over it, right? Or I'd better walk a little bit more around the park because I'm only at 8,000, right? You think, well, I think maybe you got your priorities slightly skewed here. Now, I'm a big sports guy. Health is important. Of course, you want people walking as much. Apparently, it's gone down from 10 to 7,000 recently. But anyway, you want people moving. That's a good thing. But if you can also layer onto that act of walking the slow spirit, that slow lens that you were describing there, what's not to like, right? It's just going to bring you so many benefits.
Yeah. But I'm sure you've come across this. It seems to be a struggle for many, many people. And I was listening to you, and I can't remember what the podcast was a couple of days ago in preparation for this. And you said something, and I thought to myself, that can't be true. And the guest, or sorry, the host asked you if the slow movement was making progress in the world, and you said yes, it was, and you gave multiple examples of it. And I don't see it. I see it in my own life because it's something I've embraced, and I've something I've chosen to embrace, and I'm privileged to be in a position where I can embrace it. But you genuinely feel that progress is being made?
I do. I mean, I think that the driving impulse of our society remains acceleration and speed,
Yeah.
and that's received recently an extra fillip from the arrival of AI. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm not. My head is not buried in the sand. I can see that there's a lot of pressure to go fast, and that pressure, in some ways, is increasing. But I do think I don't just think. I see the proof of it is in the eating. Right, that there are so many ways in which people are committing small and large acts of slow rebellion against that, right? Looking for ways to carve out slowness in this relentlessly fast world. And it's everything from the way we're using technology in different ways now. I mean, I'll just give you a couple of examples. I mean, you're from Ireland. Spain's another example where I think you are at the moment. I mean, we've had some of these countries have recently passed laws. So this is getting on the statute books, giving people the right not to be pestered by their companies, by phone outside the office, right? I think that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. It's not today, right? Because the dial is moving. People are saying, you know what? Tech is great. We love a bit of social media. We understand the need to be productive and get stuff done when we're away from our desks. But the idea of being always on never able to unplug is preposterous, right?
Mm.
It's toxic, it's bad for humans, and ultimately it's bad for the company that the humans are working for.
Mm.
So we're starting to see these big, that's I consider that a tectonic shift. You can also see it now. There's just been some research came out recently about how the young generation of digital natives are leading the charge away from social media. They're not even waiting for their parents to lean on them now. They're saying, you know what? Okay, we love a bit of Snapchat, Instagram's great fun, YouTube, bring it on, but not all the time, right? So they're either, uh, limiting their social media accounts, they're limiting the time they spend, they're disconnecting completely from social media. They're looking for ways to get back to slower connections with
Mm.
people in real life. They're leading the charge in that whole resurgence of artisan bread making and knitting and board games and cafes where nobody has a phone. These are all young people. It's not my generation of 50 somethings who didn't grow up with
Mm.
screens. It's the digital natives. And there's a wonderful social ritual that's emerged recently. I'm not sure if you've come across it, called stacking. Have you heard of this? Where young people go out for a coffee at wherever, Starbucks or whatever, and they sit around the table and everybody piles their phone up in a stack,
Wow.
and whoever grabs the phone first to look at social media or send it pays the bill for everybody at the table, right?
Wow.
Which is just a nifty way of saying, we have this moment here together now. We'll never have this moment again. Why spoil it by trying to be in
Yeah.
several moments at the same time? Let's just slow down and be fully and genuinely together. And that's not 50, 60 somethings coming up with stacking. That's 20 somethings saying, whoa, like we love the speed, but there are places and moments for speed. There's also times to slow things down. So, those are just some examples, but there are all kinds of seismic shifts happening across the culture in every domain where people are saying, enough is enough. Let's now start finding ways to reconnect with our inner tortoise, if you like.
I suppose the obvious thing is you wrote in praise of slow, and I think you've written at least 2 or 3 other books about slow since then. And the only reason you write a second book after the first one is that the first book is successful. if nobody reads the
Yeah.
first book, the second book is never published. But you've written multiple books on that, and huge views in your TED talks, and you're in demand as a speaker as well. So what that tells me is that definitely people want the message. To the degree to which they adapts into their lives, you can't be held responsible for that. But they want the
Yeah.
message.
Thankfully.
Exactly. It reminds me of about a year ago when I was mentoring a very successful entrepreneur, and she turned up for a session one day, and we turned up. We were having this session once a week, and she turned up. She said, "Paul, I just want to turn up. Apologize. It was online." And she said, "I apologize. I am just flat out today. It's just been an awful day. I'm so stressed. I just wanted to turn to a person and say, look, I'm not going to make this session. There's no problem." She said, "I just want to apologize in person." I said, "That's no problem whatsoever." I said, it's not a problem for me." I said, "But have you got 5 minutes?" Because we were booked for 90 minutes. I said, "Have you got 5 minutes?" And she said, "I have. I can give you just 5 minutes, but no more than that." I said, "That's cool. I just take 5 minutes." And I said to her, "Why don't we meditate together for the 5 minutes?" I said, "Why don't I just lead you through a guided meditation for five
Mhm.
minutes? That's all. You know, it makes a difference to me. You're paying me for the time, but why don't I just give you something to take away?" And she said, "Yeah, sure, let's do that." So we did it. We did a short meditation, about five minutes or so. And after I finished the meditation, because I was conscious of her time, she remained there sitting with her eyes closed for a few more minutes. And then eventually she opened her eyes. And I just said, like, "What's going on? What did you notice?" And what she noticed was that she had had a completely chaotic day so far. And that 5 minutes she'd felt peace. And her realization was it was always there. Like I hadn't given it to her.
Yeah.
It,
You'd
it
reminded her.
Yes, because she'd stopped for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
it had emerged. So, and she said it was always there when I was crazy. It was always there. So I said that's fine. She continued talking. So as long as she continued talking, I continued the conversation. with her. She was free to leave at any time. We finished the full session.
The full 90. That's so revealing. Yeah.
The point, and this is kind of what I feel about slow, and it makes sense why so many people want to buy your books, because at some level slow is there.
Yeah.
And
it is.
And what you're doing is reminding you, you're holding up a sign going slow, and they go, shit, yeah, I know what slow means.
It's you put your finger on something so true. And it's funny, the word I heard most from people, and still do actually, people who've read the book or seen a talk or something, is that they'll say, thank you for giving me, and the word is permission to slow down.
Okay.
And I remember when I first heard that, I thought, what? Why do you need, you don't know me. Why do you need my permission? What does my permission even mean? And what they were effectively saying was, thank you for reminding me that slow was there and that I could go back to it. I could bring it back out. I could let it sing. And that's exactly what you've just said there. What you were saying also reminded me, I can't remember, who is it that said famously, was it the Dalai Lama or somebody of that ilk, said once, you should meditate 1 hour a day. And if you don't have time, you should meditate for 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
Right? Which kind of chimes a little bit with your story of that entrepreneur.
But
we often have way more time than we think, and we definitely have more slow within us that we acknowledge.
Yeah, and it's very. I mean, I notice it myself, and I've had a daily meditation practice for 40 years. So, and it's first thing I do every morning. Sometimes I'll do it again during the day, and I meditate before I sleep. So it's a big part of my life. But I certainly, I mean, I can drift into the busyness, and I notice it. And when I notice it, then sometimes I have to wrench myself. I know slow is much nicer. I mean, I just know it's a much more beautiful place to be in. But when I'm in that busy, or when I'm on that treadmill, sometimes I have to grab myself and stop myself and go, okay, you almost have to arm rest yourself back to slow. And then you get back to slow. It's like, but maybe that's rewiring. We never got to our second question, and we're 30 minutes into this, which was, why are you which is fine, by the way.
Are we we're taking the slow approach?
We're taking the slow approach. Yeah. The question is, why Carl Honoré?
Well, I suppose there's a meta question there about why people would find the message to be amenable coming from someone like me. I think it's partly because I am myself a naturally fast person, and I came to slow through my own wake-up call, right? And I think this is what happens when people get stuck in roadrunner mode and they're skimming the surface. Every moment of the day is a race against the clock, and they're rushing through life instead of living it. It very often takes a shock to the system or a wake-up call to make you realize that you've forgotten how to slow down and this is doing you real harm. For a lot of people, that comes in the form of an illness. The body one day throws in the towel, and that's just, I can't take the pace anymore, and you get a burnout. I had my wake-up call when I started reading bedtime stories to my son. And honestly, back in those days, I just couldn't slow down. So I'd be sitting on his bed, speed reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Yeah, skipping lines, paragraph. I became an expert in what I called the multiple page turn technique, which if you're trying to smuggle forward,
you're not getting away with it. You're not getting away with it.
They know these stories back to front. So my son would say, "Daddy, why are there only 3 dwarves in the story? What happened to Grumpy?" And I knew that this was wrong. I could feel that this just wasn't right, but I couldn't stop myself until I caught myself one day flirting with buying a book I'd heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story. So Snow White in 60 seconds. And I thought, what a great idea. I need that book now from Amazon, like drone delivery.
Yes.
But then thankfully, light bulb over the head, epiphany. I just thought, what? I mean, what's going on here? Am I really in such a hurry? I'm prepared to fob off my little boy with a sound bite instead of a story at the end of it. And I just thought it was like an out-of-body experience. I suddenly saw myself there in sharp relief. And what I saw was ugly, unedifying, and it had to change. And I thought, I'm racing through my life instead of living it. And that was kind of the start point. And it's funny, you mentioned why me and why did my story resonate? When I sat down to write the book, I knew that was my origin story. That was the spark that set me on the journey to unpacking my own addiction to speed and also thinking about slow and travel and right. But I thought I'm just too ashamed to say this about the books, right? That I was going to get a 1 minute bedtime story. I just felt, and I thought, well, nobody will get this unless you're a parent right now. You're not going to understand this story, why it means so much. And I thought, you know what? In the end, I'm just going to start with this story because this is where it starts. This is the truth.
Mm.
And I realized right away that the idea of bedtime stories is a universal experience that
Mm.
most of us, almost all of us, have had at some point. I mean, human beings, we're storytellers. We show love, we console each other, we bond over stories. And that sacred moment when a parent sits down to a child is something we all have some experience of, whether we're on the receiving end of the story or the delivering end of it or somewhere in between, right? So I think that story really kind of just captured like the zeitgeist. I think when the book first came out was people were already just below the radar. There were things happening, questioning speed. And so it just all kind of came together in one and took off.